Hey everyone, and welcome to A2IM's Indiescussion series. My name is Alyssa Mark, and I'm the Director of Label Member Relations at A2IM, the American Association of Independent Music. For those who are joining us for the first time, this series was created to examine subjects that are heavily impacting the independent music sector and to chat with experts from our community around their experiences and opinions. If you are not a member of A2IM and you're interested in learning more about joining our organization, please feel free to reach out to membership@a2im.org, and someone from the team will get in touch with you. I'll also drop that email in the chat in just a second. Also wanted to note that we have a special announcement coming at the very top of next week for our community. So if you're not on our mailing list, I will also drop that in the chat so you can be the first one to find out. So I'm incredibly excited today for this particular panel because of its importance not only within our industry, but extending so much further into society as a whole. A2IM partnered with HeadCount earlier this year to help our membership increase voter registration and spread general election awareness for the upcoming November election. HeadCount is an amazing nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works directly with the music industry to help get information out around the best ways to participate and educate yourself in our democracy. So today we have Andy Bernstein, the co-founder and executive director of the organization, moderating our conversation around the influence and the role that music helped to play in the political landscape. We're joined by 5 other label members who have particularly outspoken artists on their roster, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about their past efforts this year, what their artists have been up to, and how we as an industry can help to make an impact. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Andy, and everybody else. Enjoy the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alyssa. It's been a pleasure to work with you and so many indie labels this year. For those who don't know HeadCount, we're a nonprofit organization that started way back in 2004 around the idea of getting people out to vote through music. And over the last 15 years, we've registered nearly 1 million voters. This has actually been our best year ever, despite the pandemic. Registered over 400,000 voters for this election, mostly all through our website. But a lot of people know us for being at events and out there with clipboards and volunteers registering voters. But this year, when it had to go all virtual, our partnerships with labels became more important than ever, both on the major label side and the indie side. And we got great support from labels such as Hopeless Records and Mom and Pop and Oh Boy Records. And I think for us, it's really been eye-opening, just some of the power of indie labels and how much artists look to their labels for guidance on social action and just on amplifying whatever message they want to get out there. So I was really excited when I heard from Melissa, both in terms of working with this organization and also moderating this panel. And we have some really great people to talk about this subject. So I think I'm going to introduce them one by one and let them tell you a little bit more about themselves, starting with Catie Ginsburg, who's the head of sync at Partisan Records.
So yeah, I'm the head of sync and brand partnerships at Partisan and Knitting Factory Records, and work with artists such as Idol, Spontaneous DC, Cigarettes After Sex, Mel Meth Luthi, The Black Angels, and a bunch more. And then we also work with the entire Fela Kuti back catalog. So we own all the masters. So I'm working with his estate all the time on initiatives, on interesting things we can do. So yeah, it's really fun. It's a good job.
That's a pretty cool catalog to have. All right, next up we have Jonathan Williger, who's the marketing manager at Smithsonian Folkways.
Hi everyone, yeah, I'm Jonathan Williger. I'm in charge of all the marketing at Folkways. As mentioned, Folkways is the nonprofit record label of the Smithsonian Institution. Began as an independent label in over 70 years ago, so 72 years ago at this point is when Folkways was founded. Has been the home of a lot of political music over the years and lots of other types of music, notably releasing a lot of iconic records by Pete Seeger, Elizabeth Cotten, Lead Belly, Lucinda Williams, and many more. And recently we have continued to work with a lot of up-and-coming musicians and as well as releasing a lot of very cool archival material.
Thank you. And next up, we have a musician herself, recording artist, Deborah Ray.
Hey everyone, I'm Deborah Ray. I am actually representing two entities here today. I work predominantly with Terry Lynn Carrington and her project called The Social Science, and we are currently under Motéma Music, and so I'm also representing them here today. Happy to be here. Thanks.
Next up is Tomas Cookman, who is the founder and CEO of Nacional Records.
Hey, Andy, happy to be here. My name is Tomas. I started a label called Nacional Records. It's been around for a while in the Latin space. We also manage a lot of bands, book tours around the world, and do lots of sync work, and just try to have a nice day every day.
And last up, Carter Van Pelt, who's the head of catalog at VP Records.
Hi, everyone. Yes, Carter Van Pelt, I'm director of catalog at VP Records, a label that goes back to Jamaica in the late 1950s as Randy's Records. So 60-year history, 25,000 master catalog. I can't even begin to touch on it, but my job is kind of partially curating archival releases and promoting releases that are also catalog as they come out of our Greensleeves sister label. And some of our current artists include John Nine and Busy Signal and Alba Rosie, Romaine Virgo, Christopher Martin, if you know the reggae and dancehall space at all.
Great. Well, thank you all. And what we're here to do is talk about the role of politics in music. And this is, of course, very close to my heart and what HeadCount does. We were kind of founded on the idea that music is a connective tissue, and that when fans share a love of an artist, there's an opportunity to engage them for many, many different reasons. Starting with the simple idea that people gather in one place, or at least they used to, and it was a great place to reach a lot of people. But really the bigger idea was that there are natural leaders. Musicians are natural leaders, and fans form communities. And when you have leaders and you have communities, you have all the ingredients for social movements. And we felt that if we could channel that into voter engagement, that we could turn out thousands of voters who might not otherwise vote. I didn't know we would register 1 million voters. I didn't really know that would happen until last week when we looked at our numbers and realized where we were going. But I'd love to get all of your opinions on that. Really, the role that musicians have, the tangible influence. Why might a musician have more of a lasting effect as opposed to another public figure? So I'd love to hear what any of you guys think about that.
Don't everyone speak at the same time? I mean, I think because I didn't hear anyone else talking, I'll just take a stab at it. And I was trying to think about, there's something magical about the power of musicians. And I think that for younger people, that power is amplified exponentially. I know in my case personally, I was checking every detail of the artists that I was into in those formative years. And it's funny, this panel is titled Get Up, Stand Up, because that song specifically was a part of my journey into music and into Jamaican music specifically. But I think that musicians have a hold on people and artists more broadly, but musicians have a hold on people, and particularly young people, that politicians by themselves don't have. And so, I mean, that's where it all starts, and that's why the power and the potential is there in the first place.
I also think like musicians have a direct link with their fans via social media that didn't exist before. And it's really easy to see when an artist is being genuine versus just posting something because a publicist said to do this or whatever. And I think when they're throwing their support behind a candidate or behind an issue that is true to their heart, that's really apparent. And I don't think that's something that really existed in the past. There's always a middleman or a publicist or something like that. And that doesn't exist. You don't have to have that anymore.
I also think that fans sort of get it right from the get-go if it's a photo op or not for the artist. I think it's very key that it's a natural and organic message for him or her to say. Recently in Puerto Rico, for example, it was one of the first cases I've seen that was basically led by musicians, and it was about the ouster of the governor of Puerto Rico. There was a big scandal. And if you look at any of the protests, if you look at what was going on on the news and on social media, it was basically run by musicians. I mean, there weren't other politicians, which they typically are on the front lines, or activists or political leaders. It was truly something run by musicians who had the island's ear. And within a short amount of time, there was a massive change in government there. And I think that was exemplary. It's a small island, of course, so it's harder to replicate that in Ireland or the United States or other bigger countries, but it was amazing to see it happen, and it happened without any violence and just basically with the truth.
I think a lot of people also, you know, from a young age, people define themselves and like develop their identity around what the music that they listen to, right? And so there's a lot of emotional connection between the artist and musician. And I think that gives musicians, or sorry, the musician and the fan. And I think that gives musicians, you know, more of an an emotional opening in their fans' hearts to like have their message come through. I think that a lot of it comes from, you know, the fact that we live on a, you know, sometimes daily basis with these musicians in our lives, and, you know, their words entering our ears and affecting us in unexpected ways. And that can lead to more of an openness to listen to those perspectives when it comes to politics and social engagement.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of vulnerability that an artist has to have when they are sharing their work that I think that people have come to appreciate, that they're more able to listen to that and to see that for what it is rather than try to pick apart, is there some other ulterior motive at play? That politicians might not have that luxury because of, I guess, what they're trying to do themselves.
You know, it's an interesting theme. I hear what you're saying is kind of talking about the musician bringing them their authentic selves to their fans through talking about their beliefs, talking about something outside of their music. And for HeadCount, because we're nonpartisan, that's often the part we're not touching. We're, for one thing, we go to a lot of artists who have not been political and saying, well, you know, if you don't need to take a stand one way or the other, this is a way to do something positive without it. And then for the artists that are very political, we're saying, well, you know, here's the message, is just participate. You can, all the other messaging is outside of us. So it's interesting for me to hear that perspective. And I think it's very true that in the end, the authenticity matters a lot. And when an artist is bringing their true selves, rather than it being performative or once a year or once every 4 years, the fans do know the difference. I think that's very true. What about like the role of kind of overt connections between the music itself and politics, whether it's protest songs or lending a song to a campaign? What are you guys seeing? Are you seeing that that's something that there's more or less of now? Is that a real opportunity for artists? Like right now, we're getting an email almost every day from maybe an up and coming artist who's written a song about voting. It literally is coming in once every 24 hours. And that's new. We've never seen that before. So something, at least at the grassroots level, is happening. But I'm curious what you guys are seeing in terms of the real, true intersection of the music itself and politics right now.
I think first and foremost, it's always important that the politicians or the movement actually ask your opinion, your permission to use your music. And that's an important part of the process. But beyond that, I started seeing so much more music that was so much related to politics. Even during the first Obama campaign, you started hearing reggae songs about Obama. You started hearing pop songs about Obama. You started hearing heavy metal songs about Obama. It was incredible. Somewhere I have a playlist of all my Obama songs. And I thought that was like a changing moment, at least for my listening. Period.
What else are you guys seeing on your labels?
I mean, me personally, I feel like we definitely have some artists who have been and always have been more politically engaged, and that's completely reflected in their music. And I think it's something where it's like they don't want to feel opportunistic. They don't want to be like, hey, I'm going to write this song about voting. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing if that feels right for that artist, but I think that's something they're super aware of. Is this still needs to feel like something that is something coming from us and our art and our heart, and that's how we're absorbing what's happening in the world around us and releasing it into the world versus just saying like, let me write a protest song because protests are happening. I don't feel like I'm necessarily seeing that. But I mean, I work with an artist, Amel, who did write a protest song for the Arab Spring. She wrote a song and it kind of became the protest song. She became the voice of the Tunisian revolution, but it happened organically. She didn't write that song about the revolution. And because of that, and I think that feels more natural to me. And I think that is something that, I don't know, I don't think it should be forced, I guess, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
In our case, we've very, very heavy political artists like Manu Chao and Fabuloso Cadillacs who have written songs that millions of kids throughout Latin America and beyond really take heed to what they're saying in their songs. And I think in their cases, it was natural, it was real, and people knew they weren't full of shit. That was them talking, and they knew it wasn't just about that moment and possibly the next single that followed.
Katie, you said that you have the Fela Kuti catalog. Now, I think of Fela as the sort of holy grail of political musicians, and there's a wonderful documentary from the 1970s. Is it called Music is the Message? Do I have that right?
Music is the Weapon?
Music is the Weapon. Yeah. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, what's incredible about this documentary is it's a contemporary documentary from the 70s. It's not filmed in past tense, it's current tense. And his compound gets raided by the government while the documentary is getting filmed. And so you're really seeing in, outside the United States, how music can be so revolutionary that there's a government crackdown on it. And it's such a way, I so highly recommend watching this. And it, for one thing, it makes you grateful that as bad as things can get in the United States, nothing like that has happened. And I'm curious, as the holder of that catalog, do you find that do people sample Fela a lot? Are musicians turning to him as a?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, and I mean, I will say I've seen an increase in, we're seeing Fela songs be added to more playlists right now. I mean, and because he was a protest musician. I mean, he wrote a song called Zombie that is basically calling the military regime zombies for just blindly following along. And he's always been an outspoken activist, and he's been outspoken. He came to America, he got introduced to the Black Panther ideology and became very involved with that. And that kind of turned him on politically in America to the African-American struggle. And he's obviously very outspoken, or was very outspoken about Pan-Africanism and that whole idea of how that needed to happen in Africa. But yeah, I mean, we've seen, and he's always kind of been like a cult musician. And I do think something that we try to do at our label is try to expose him to a wider audience. So that's why we've done certain like collaborations or different syncs and stuff that we've kind of gone after, is because we want to bring him to a wider audience. But I think he's one of the most important activist musicians out there. And we've definitely seen a huge increase over this past summer, for sure. Just an interest in streaming and that kind of stuff.
Debo, are there artists that you have found particularly inspirational over the years in terms of putting message behind music?
Yeah, definitely. Honestly, as of late, I've been kind of tasked with coming up with more historical influences because of the record that I made with Terry. And so I started listening a lot more to like James Brown's I'm Black and I'm Proud, and listening to more of the artists' backlogs, like listening to Aretha again and really understanding and picking apart where her intent comes from. Nina Simone is a big one for me, who I think about Mississippi Goddamn, for example, and that's just like unequivocally a protest song, and her relentlessness had really shaped my own musicianship and what I want to say. So that's all from like the civil rights and post-civil rights era, but now listening to things like, for example, I'm listening to a lot of Beyonce lately and seeing how people are digesting similar messages in this newer or more contemporary or music form, but still the same relentlessness pervades the music. I'm noticing that. So I'm really influenced by them. Yeah.
You mentioned James Brown, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. So streaming on that song has jumped 150 times since the death of George Floyd. Absolutely a staggering number. And I'll credit Alyssa Mark for throwing that stat together for researching this. And it's not just that. We've seen contemporary songs. YG's FDT increased over 10 times in streaming. That's, those numbers are impossible to ignore. So, on the label side, do you guys see that there is is this happening within your catalogs that you're seeing? Is there really a commercial implication right now that topical songs are what people want to listen to and therefore good business as well as good art?
Definitely on the folkway side. And additionally, I mean, not just music, but there's a lot of, Black Power poetry from the 70s, like Sonia Sanchez, and a lot of speeches. Like we have a Huey Newton speech record in the catalog that we've seen jump as well. And, a lot of our contemporary artists have gotten a lot more attention as well. Last year, we released an album by Our Native Daughters, a quartet of women fronted by Rhiannon Giddens, who are all African American, who are singing about sort of the dual relationship of racism and misogyny. And that's been added, those songs have been added to a lot more playlists in the past several months. Continues to sort of rise on our best-selling albums of all time on our over the past several months as well. So it definitely seems like from our end that people are taking the time to explore and not just find the top tier things, but actually digging into the catalog and finding some other sort of interesting gems that speak to this moment.
When many things, obviously, there were many reactions to George Floyd and what followed. And one that was really interesting was on the major label side. I think there was a moment of reckoning where these companies were making millions of dollars, largely off Black artists, many not having Black executives making key decisions. And I think there was all three of the majors announced very, very large financial donation pools, over $100 million, to support causes related to Black Lives Matter. And it was, a really interesting moment to see the kind of numbers they were talking about. And I'm curious from an indie perspective, how you guys viewed that. Certainly indie labels don't have those kind of resources, but it was, certainly a crossroads moment for the major labels. What was going on the indie side as all this was happening?
I personally find that more as a major label issue. I think indie labels probably would get called out on things like that a lot quicker than some of the majors would.
I think it is a little bit of an issue that pervades the entire music industry, though. I mean, I work at an indie label, and we work with a lot of white artists and a lot of white staff members. So it's definitely something that we kind of definitely took to heart, and we started having some very serious conversations at the label. And we do a weekly activism meeting now. We're going to be doing it indefinitely, just so we have this constant check-in. So we're checking in on what can we do, what can we be doing better. I think all of us were so inspired by that moment, and it really kicked off a lot of emotional feelings. And we were like, how do we continue this? And how do we not have this be just this one flash in the pan this month of June when we're all talking about this? How do we make true change? And so, I think it's kind of opened up a discussion, at least at our label, that we didn't really openly it just wasn't something that we were openly discussing. And I think that's been a huge, huge positive part of all of this.
What I've actually found from Motéma that I would hope is kind of going to become an example for a lot of indie labels, but major labels as well, is to gather and curate artists to tell specific stories. In this case, Black stories. And that's something that I take pride in with this label, is that they've been able to really amass the right type of artists who have something to say, even if it's not like a blanket statement, it's still the nuance of the culture that's coming out. So that's what I would hope that more labels, small or large, indie or not, would be able to do, is be able to curate those stories more often.
In the Latin space, I think you're beginning to see more conversations of Afro-Latino presence, from everything from record releases to award shows to soap operas to et cetera, et cetera. And it's an ongoing conversation that I think is finally getting to a place where it's just not lip service. It's actually something's really, really happening. And I think that's important, and especially with just so many artists coming in that identify as Afro-Latino as well, who are helping to make that change happen quicker.
From a label standpoint, what are the models through which you're able to support causes and activism? I from the other side, I'd say that this was really the first cycle that we worked directly with labels. We'd worked a lot with management companies, a lot with media companies, and we're still kind of figuring out what that model is. And I'm curious from you guys' perspective, like when there's a cause that you want to get behind as a label, how has that worked well in the past? What have been the challenges, and what do you see as an ideal model for the future?
I mean, on our end, I think one challenge is we're a worldwide label. So it's when we want to get behind one cause, a lot of times it'll be US specific or UK specific. And so I think that's a dialogue we have where like we're putting a t-shirt on sale where all the net proceeds are going to a certain cause, but we're going to have to split it because there's not really necessarily like a worldwide situation. I think another thing that I really like that our label's doing is we get unlimited, basically paid time to go volunteer for a cause. If there's something like the majority of my company is going to be poll workers, and that's not going to count as a vacation day or anything. They're just allowing us to do that, and I think that is something that's a positive thing to do as well as a company.
I mean, going to your whole point about having a label that has a presence in other parts of the world. I mean, in the case of National Records, you know, we have offices in Mexico City and Madrid. And when we do things, for example, we're heavily involved with Voto Latino to get more and more people registered. And obviously that is a US conversation, and that's a US push. And we've worked as close as we can, not only just through our socials, but as many of the artists in our roster who feel comfortable having a US political conversation to talk to their people. I mean, the Latino numbers and what could potentially be a difference in this next election are amazing. There's 32 million Latino voters who are eligible to vote in 2020. Every year, there's over 1 million young Latinos who become of voting age. So that means over the last 4 years, 4 million Latinos have been hearing how they're rapists and how they're horrible and how they should be separated from their families. So all those type of things make a difference. And obviously you need to connect that dot and make sure they register and then make sure they show up and vote. So we've been getting the message out as any way we can. And I think even like initiatives like Voto Latino have been really healthy in putting media campaigns together and getting bigger and bigger and bigger artists to come out and say something. You know, when they're using like Bad Bunny songs or Tigres del Norte songs in commercials, that speaks to people. And it's just like anything else. I mean, sometimes you're just going to have to convey that message over and over and over until it gets into people's skulls. And any little part that Nacional can do to help, for us, makes us feel very warm and fuzzy.
At VP, we are in the pre-release stages of a project to bring awareness to human trafficking and as it concerns Jamaica. And I can't even talk about it because I don't want to be the one that blows this out into the public space and let the people who are working on it announce it. But it's kind of new territory to have a track that's specifically produced with artists that are on the label all coming together to create and contribute to this one thing with one cause message. It's new territory for us, so we're just in the middle of it on that level. So more to come and look out for on that.
Right.
Carter, just an aside, are you actually in an office? It looks like you're Not at home and in
I
an
am in an
office.
office, yes.
What's that like?
Hi, we're Caviar. We can help you get food you want.
That's not my answer. Okay. Well, I come in 2 half days a week, and it's been, well, I mean, I could talk about this on and on and on, but we're sort of on a limited schedule here in reintroducing the possibility of working in the office. It's important to the owners to have people back, and I think that we're unusual in that sense. So I'm only here two half days, but other people are coming back to the office. Anyway, I won't say any more about it than that.
Well, we have a question from Christopher Pitts. He asks, what makes you optimistic about reaching and activating new audiences today? Anyone want to field that?
Yeah, I'll start with that. Well, this pandemic has forced people to sit with a lot, and fortunately, people are intaking things a little bit differently because of it. They're willing to sit because they have no choice but to. So what my hope is that because people are now being upfront and personal with things that need to change, or music that's now coming out, hopefully that will also turn into a time of reflection and a time of intention shifting that can then lead to more growth, and the music can speak to people at a deeper level because of it. That's what I hope. Hoping, at least.
You know, I got some numbers from the Voto Latino, talking back again about Voto Latino. They tell me here that in 2018, 48% of Latino voters were not contacted by a political party or campaign. That's a very, very big number. So the fact that there are people taking note of that and trying to at least get them, whatever your decision is at the end of the day is your decision, but at least know what's going on and at least know what the issues are and at least know what the reality is. And I think that's an important part of whether it's a label, whether it's an artist, or whether it's an organization. I think that it's about time we try to get the truth out as much as possible and in any way we can.
Thomas, let me ask you a political question from your perspective. It is often said that the Democratic Party takes Latino voters for granted. I've heard that said many times. And there's data out there that Latino voters are turning for Trump compared to 4 years ago, and one of the very few demographic groups that Trump is faring better with. What any thoughts on that and that dynamic there?
I think unfortunately it's really tough to believe any one source anymore, and that's tragic. You know, I think it also depends on the source that's saying that. You know, if you go to Florida, maybe that can be true because, you know, Cubans tend to be Republican and they tend to stay true to their party. So if you go to the right neighborhoods, you know, in and outside of Miami, that very well could be true. And then the same thing in Texas. We have Latinos who've been there for so many generations that they're Texans more so than anything else. So they tend to vote like the rest of Texas do. But I think to number one, consider Latinos as a block, and you tell them this message and we're all going to follow you. I mean, gosh, we can't even decide what to call ourselves. If we're on the East Coast, we're Hispanic. If we're on the West Coast, we're Latino. So even just from that basic point, it's hard to put a name and face on who Latinos are. But I would be very, very, very surprised if Latinos vote for Donald Trump in this next election. And then again, there's always surprises. I mean, I live in a neighborhood which is quite white and Korean, and I was really surprised after the last election to see that it was a majority Clinton voting neighborhood. So there are always going to be surprises, but specifically to Latinos and how they're going to vote in this next election, I truly believe, especially in the narratives that you're beginning to hear more and more on the news, and it's interesting because the news on the Latino side tends to, from the high point of it all, come from Miami, although the important, for example, here in LA, the biggest newscast is Univision's Channel 34, and that's all generated out of the West Coast. So that it's great because it doesn't let the political messaging be skewed one way or the other, and it tends to reflect what, in this case, LA wants. And I think that as long as the messages keep on getting out, and people are not just hearing the same old BS that you hear on some of the talking heads out there, I think that we're going to be in a comfortable place.
You know, it's a good transition to a question that we have from Mia Cambronero. Says, this year I founded a Latin American-based nonprofit label dedicated entirely to producing politically and socially disruptive music in collaboration with social movements. And she says she'd love to hear about what this group thinks of a label solely dedicated to this and what it can do to support new artists as they enter the modern industry.
Well, first and foremost, I think in Latin America, there's an amazing history of artists who are extremely political in their lyrics, in their speeches, in their album covers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I think that there's definitely always has been an audience there, and there always will be an audience. I think the US, it'd be interesting to hear what Partisan or VP or Smithsonian or anyone else has to say about that. But I think specifically to Latin America, it does not surprise me that there are labels, big, medium, or small, tend to be medium, maybe small, that would focus fully on a political message. And also a sort of a political message that's not too extreme. I mean, because I don't know who that helps either, but anyway.
Yeah, actually one of the first labels that Smithsonian Folkways acquired after Folkways became a part of the Smithsonian was Paradigm Records, which is celebrating its 50th year this year, which was founded by Barbara Dane and Erwin Silver, and that was all exclusively like leftist political music from around the world. That's actually where the Huey Newton record comes into our catalog. Barbara Dane's I Hate the Capitalist System, a lot of things like that. I think that, you know, letting the artist lead the message, I think, is pretty important, and that's something that we've been talking about a lot, especially since being a part of the Smithsonian. Our organization itself cannot be overtly partisan, so we do a lot of work working, you know, sort of behind the scenes directly with artists to help them find the best words to say what they want to say, and having them really sort of lead in terms of what's important to them, what types of causes they want to bring light to, and then helping just to give them the resources to amplify that message.
Do you guys find that there's a dialogue between the artist and label about causes and politics and their work in that space, or does it really come more, does it generally come more from one side or the other, or it's just a constant conversation?
On our end, I would say, I mean, I think we're pretty lucky in that, I mean, our roster isn't huge. So I think we have very close relationships with every single artist that we sign and we work with. So I think that's a constant dialogue. Obviously, an artist can definitely will come to us and be like, hey, this is something I feel really passionately about, or this song and this album means this, and like, we're that platform to support them. But I would say the majority of our artists, that's something we have a really healthy dialogue with about at all times. And then I think as our platform, like we've shared graphics, all of our artists and managers of just get the vote out and that kind of thing. So that's more nonpartisan, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I think that's so important. It's part of their art. It's part of what's happening right now. So I think that dialogue is happening with our managers, with our artists on a daily basis, to be honest. Yeah.
Well, speaking of dialogue, I want to invite anybody watching to ask questions. You can either put it in the chat or the Q&A. And I'm going to put something in the chat. HeadCount this year, we created a digital kit that we put out for, this really came at the request of some management companies and labels. We'd never done this before, and we ended up using it a ton. And it has a calendar. We basically have a new message every day leading up to the election, a graphic, a resource, a link, and then we highlight kind of one per week as the main message of the week. And now we're down to just like 3 weeks left. So right there in the chat, it's easy to remember, headcount.org/kit. And I invite anybody to use it in any way they want. It's just an open source thing you can really run with. And I invite our viewers to put questions in the chat for our panelists as well. Let's talk a little bit more about following George Floyd's death. I think it's a topic we're going to get back to a lot, because I really feel like if there was a true turning point that happened on so many levels. I mean, we went from barely registering any voters in April and May, when I think the pandemic was front and center in everybody's minds, to the week the protest started, we heard from more artists and labels, and we saw this, like, the lights go on, and suddenly we went from registering less than 1,000 voters in April to 20,000 in May, and building up to, well over 100,000 in September. And there was no question; it was very clear what was happening. So I think it's a topic that we can talk about and can't talk about enough. But what did you guys see on your end with artists you work with and with just the business? How did things change starting in June of this year?
From the artist's perspective, this particular record that I was on with Terry Lynn, called The Waiting Game, we had recorded it and did all this work talking about these types of topics for maybe 2 years. It came out last year. It wasn't until June, though, that people started really understanding the story and extrapolating what we meant by what we were trying to present with the music. And I believe that a lot of artists who have put out a lot of this more charged, politically charged, or racially charged music, it was in June that people said, hey, let me actually unpack this more and see what's happening. So I think that, along with people just saying, hey, actually now people are more open to speaking about this. I have the platform that is open now to discuss this, to write on this, to release music like this. June was the explosion, the cap exploded off of the bottle.
Regarding Latin America and how that plays into it, I mean, the murder of Floyd was there's been versions of that, unfortunately, in every country. In Mexico, I mean, just last week, a Chilean cop at a protest threw a 16-year-old boy off a bridge. I mean, there's just so much craziness going on in the world that I think that it's just so important that we keep on talking about this, and we keep on not normalizing this, and make sure that everybody understands this is not normal. There has to be a change.
Now let's get back to the election and talk about my favorite topic, which is voter engagement. There's, for one thing, this cycle we've seen more happen than probably the 3 cycles before. We're seeing more in corporate America. We're definitely seeing more from major labels. Tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing, or artists on your labels are doing. It's always amazing to learn more for me. I follow it closely, and yet I learn about something new every day because so much is happening. I and the audience, I'm sure, would love to hear about what you guys are doing in the voter space.
As far as Nacional is concerned, we talk, about Voto Latino, and Voto Latinos, I think, been doing a great job in getting the word out to Latinos that they have to register and they have to vote.
Yes, and we're messaging from all partisan socials. We're sharing graphics and everything with all of our management and artists and everyone, and just really encouraging everyone to use every platform at their disposal to really get the word out. And it's also actually been interesting going back to like the UK versus US. Like we do talk to our bands like Idols, where they have this massive platform, and they're UK based, but they're like, this election affects us just as intensely, so they're fully engaged as well. So I think, I mean, kind of across all of our artists, there's from very low to very high engagement, but everyone's taking it very seriously, obviously.
And it tends to be more successful when it is a natural thing for the artist, so they're not just posting a graphic that you ask them to post, but it's their text makes a lot more sense, and it's personal. And I think that's when you really do connect that dot with the fan who's reading that post. I think without that, it's like having a pop artist just doing something, with all due respect to pop artists, of course, just because someone convinced them to do it that week. And I don't think that helps us that as much as people who are truly engaged. And, you know, as you were mentioning earlier, how I'm not sure what artist you said that got you a lot more people registered than even Billie Eilish or anybody else. And that's what it's all about, because some artists will always naturally have a closer and real connection to their followers. And those are the artists that you really have to try to get engaged and to get interested in, and hopefully to support.
Most of VP's artists are Jamaican citizens, so their involvement in American politics is super limited. I can only remember Coco T had a song called Barack Obama in 2008, but Jamaican artists get very involved in their own process, and including the whole process of cutting custom dub plates, which was a big controversy recently when they had a prime minister, a new election, and everyone was running around to cut specials for politicians and that's just a different part of the Jamaican process that I've never seen on an equivalent level here. But I didn't want to stay out of the conversation, but I know that's not entirely relevant to the way things operate here. But it's an interesting nuance for sure.
For Folkways, sort of as I said, you know, we as an organization aren't able to do as much direct things, but our artists are definitely active. Specifically, we're releasing an album by Layla McCullough next week, and she's going to be doing a live stream with Fair Fight, Stacey Abrams' organization. And we have other artists, you know, talking frequently on social media about voting, including like Lula Wiles, who are very active politically, especially around like indigenous rights and things like that.
Utilizing social media is really big as well. Reutilizing social media, in a way, creating the climate or creating the community of change in voting. It's not just I'm voting because it's also right, but I'm voting because I'm a part of a community of people who also believe in what I believe in, and we are all collectively going to vote. That's really important now.
Especially in a year where voting has become more confusing than ever before. Yeah. Where do you vote? How do you vote? When do you vote? It used to be a lot easier.
Yeah, that's such an important point. One of the things that we're doing in the next couple of weeks is a lot of education around early voting and how to vote by mail in a way where your ballot won't get tossed. And I think that the music and cultural leaders have such an important role to play right now, because there was a great story in USA Today, a very long story yesterday, about the literally millions of mail-in ballots that get tossed and all the reasons they get tossed. And there's kind of three reasons. One is they get mailed too late. Another is they get filled out incorrectly. And a third is that the signature doesn't match. And the signature match is a doozy, because who knows how they signed their signature 15 years ago, and signatures change. And it's so important that this is part of the public conversation and consciousness. And if people just know that mail-in ballots get tossed a lot, they can either choose to vote early or just be really mindful when they are filling out their ballot and check it twice and have a family member check it and things like that. But who would have heard about this before? Like, I do this for a living and I didn't know this was a problem. And so we think it's just critical that people who have a big platform, such as musicians, are out there talking about this. And one of the things we're doing is we're inviting particularly musicians who live in battleground states to do short videos. We're providing scripts and talking points about how to vote by mail or vote early in their home states. And then we are pushing that video out to local press and hoping that the local press will have local musicians come on, like a morning show or something like that, and study up a little bit on the issue and be able to do a media interview. And this is one of our strategies. So I'll let that be known to everybody. And the great thing about local press is they're more interested in someone being local than somebody being fabulously famous. If they're meaningful in that community, then they're meaningful to local press. So there's a real opportunity for independent musicians to help start this desperately needed national conversation about the risks and pitfalls of voting by mail. So I want to put that out there, that if any artists on any of your labels or anyone who's watching, especially if they live in a battleground state, that's where we're putting the PR resources, who can talk about this. We can get them prepped. We can get them all the talking points. Then they just go direct to camera, put it on their social media, and then we push it out to the local press. That's one of our many strategies as we get within, I guess, 3 weeks to the election. And right now, people are voting by mail at record numbers, and we need to educate the public about how to do it properly. So that's my little spiel for everybody. What are you finding that the conversations that you're having with artists and others you work with about this election? Do you, to Tomas's point, is there a lot of confusion? Is there where are the holes? Where are the information gaps? What are the questions people are asking right now? I guess put another way, I'm curious, like that dialogue that you're having with musicians, like what have been some of the recent conversations? What are the takeaways that you're feeling in these conversations that you're having?
On mind, I think one of the things that I mean, all our artists are human. They're processing this pandemic, they're processing the election, they're processing it kind of at the same rate we are. So I think some of it's like they don't want to necessarily misspeak or speak too soon until they fully have processed it themselves, because for them, this is on their platform. Their fans are then going to take that and they can't really take it back. So I don't think there's like a fear or anything like that. I think a lot of them maybe have been somewhat slower than maybe even we would have wanted, just because they're still processing it themselves and figuring out themselves and figuring out their stance on certain things and figuring out how they do want to message this out to their fans and how they do want to engage their fans. So I think that's been actually an interesting part of it, where like, I think sometimes on the label side, we're like be loud, be proactive, be like, do the thing, like use your platform is something that we're always telling them. And for a lot of them, they're like, hey, wait a second, like we're still figuring this out ourselves. And I think that's a really interesting thing to kind of take to heart.
It's not a right fit for every single artist to be the flag waver in the front line. Some people like to be in the middle, some people like to be in the back. And I think as long as everyone does their share, whatever big, medium, small role that may be, I think that's what's going to be the successful part of this rollout of getting the correct information out to people. And going back to voting, I mean, it's just confusing that there can be many different, I mean, this is what, you know, you're so involved with this, Andy, and the fact that you're just learning how so many different ways your vote cannot count. I mean, it almost sounds like, yeah, I don't want this vote to count. I mean, it's just, it sounds like an umpire calling balls and strike, that it's just one person's decision to count it or not. So it's a very trying time. And on top of it, musicians, as much as they're taking time to digest everything, I mean, they've had their lives upended, you know, since March. No one's making money, or a lot less money. So it's very, very trying times. And although, I mean, we're already in September, October, getting into November now, that I think it's enough time for people to get on board and start really supporting, if they do feel comfortable doing that. Not everybody does.
I'll share one other thing in the chat, which is our Make Your Vote Count page, which is what we created as a resource to answer tough questions like, what happens if I get an absentee ballot and then I decide that I want to vote in person? That's a question we get asked a lot. And so we have an answer for every state, and the answer is different in every state. So putting that in the chat. We also had a question come in again from Mia, and she says, participant media is doing what we're trying to do at my company, but in the movie industry. They made Moonlight, Green Book, Roma, Dark Waters, etc. They started with $100 million from Jeff Skull. Do you think the only way for us to exist in this way is to raise $100 million? Please be honest. And I do want to plug that participant media is releasing David Byrne's American Utopia, that HeadCount is featured in, and Participant Media did come in as a sponsor of HeadCount. So thank you, Jeff Skull and Participant Media. We got a very, 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 very small piece of that $100 million. But I think that's it's a very important question. It's like, I think the question is, what is the role for sort of philanthropy, investment that is, B Corp kind of social impact investment in the indie music space? And is there an opportunity to take, there's a lot of billionaires in America, an ungodly number of billionaires, many of whom want to do something good and many of whom are big music fans. Is there an opportunity for indie labels to bring in some of that capital through by being on the forefront of change? I think it's a great question. Is that an untapped opportunity in the indie world?
Depends on what kind of strings might be attached to that money.
Yeah.
It's hard to fight capitalism with billionaire money.
It's true. I tell you just my own take on it. When I see what's happening on the live music side in the pandemic, and all these venues that are going down and all these independent promoters, what my take is, I personally know a few, not many, but a few very wealthy people who love live music. And I haven't had the balls to have this conversation, but I want to sit down with them and say, save the damn industry, save the industry you love. It might be a really good investment because you're going to get a value investment right now, or you'll just have a little less money and you'll still get to go to concerts, and so will everybody else. This can't hurt you. You can't lose on this deal. And I hope some of that happens because our industry is really in a lot of trouble. I don't know what has been the impact on the record side, but clearly on the live music side, it's, for every independent promoter and venue is in a hell of a lot of trouble right now. And I guess that's with our 2 minutes left. I guess just out of my own curiosity, like how has the pandemic impacted the economics of the indie label industry?
In the case of
go ahead.
In the case of Nacional, I think that we, being we're 25 people, so we're able to zig and zag as quick as we need to be. And, we just found new ways to make money and new ways to do what it is that we were able to do. We've been fortunate enough not to have to lay off anybody during this since March. And it just goes into the whole spunkiness of being an independent label. I mean, it's not the first or the last time that we're going to be hit with, a right cross. And you just have to shake it off and how do I continue on the road? And I think that obviously there's always going to be casualties on the side of the road, but in our case, we've just been very fortunate. And I think our artists and our staff has been very understanding of we just need to reinvent ourselves in the places that we do. So streaming has been great, syncs have been great. And even on the live side, I mean, we're actually finally having our artists getting paid for live streams with brands. So you just figure it out. You have no other choice. We're not going to close.
I think VP's been in a similar position. I mean, we're just slightly larger than you. Maybe we have 40 or 50 staff, but having settled into the benefits of a large catalog in the streaming world, that's been a cushion for sure. And we're really looking at how to navigate that space going forward and figure out what this means in terms of physical product sales. But wow, having a big catalog is certainly an enormous benefit in this time. So that's been a stabilizer for VP Records for sure.
Same here. I mean, most of our artists are catalog artists. It's not like Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie are going out and touring a lot. We do have several very active contemporary touring artists. And one thing that we've been doing is participating in Bandcamp Day and making sure that digital revenue from that we get in from Bandcamp goes directly to our artists in a timely fashion. Our living ones and touring ones.
Well, I see that we have hit 3 o'clock. Thank you all. I found this all very informative and great to get all of your perspectives. And I hope the audience found the same. And we've got something like 3 weeks. I can't even calculate it anymore. It's getting so close. It's unimaginable. And I encourage everybody to, what we say often is nobody wants to wake up on November 4th wishing they had done more. So do everything you can between now and the election. Please feel free to use HeadCount's resources. And if there are artists that want to get more involved, particularly artists who live in battleground states, I mentioned that opportunity to talk about mail-in voting and some of the risks and opportunities. And just thank you, everybody, and let's rock this thing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.